Well, the nationwide push to criminalise coercive control has continued, with Queensland a step closer to becoming the second state to make a move on the issue. And more than 90% of women victim survivors of coercive control believe that it should be criminalised in Australia. And that's according to a new Monash University study. Well, for more on this, joining me now live is Reeves from the Family Violence Prevention Centre. Ellen, thanks so much for your time. You'd no doubt be aware of what Queensland's trying to achieve at the moment. But talk us through the survey and what you found out of some of these survivors of abuse.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, Simon. So as you said, the study found that the overwhelming majority of victim survivors believe that there should be a standalone criminal offence of coercive control in their state or territory. In particular, they think that it will play a really key role in raising community awareness about this form of domestic and family violence, and that it will send a clear message that this behaviour is unacceptable. And that community awareness piece, according to victim survivors, will also create new referral pathways and support for victim survivors experiencing coercive control. What was quite interesting about the study, though, is that we asked participants what they think criminalising coercive control will do. And whilst the majority said raising community awareness, the fewest number of victim survivors believe that criminalising coercive control will actually improve victim survivor safety. And I think that this really speaks to the nuances of the report, in that participants were quite realistic about their own negative experiences with the legal system. And there was a sense that almost of distrust of this reform that they were supporting. We had many victim survivors, for instance, who they felt that a separate offence of coercive control wouldn't have actually helped them in their case, or that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable or safe testifying against their abuser in court.
So in Queensland, the bill that they're looking at, it lays the foundation for a standalone offence, and it does this by broadening the definition of domestic violence to include a pattern of behaviour. So is that the framework or the model broadly that, for instance, you or victims or advocates are after? And talk us through where each of the states are at with this.
Yeah, absolutely. The course of conduct or the pattern of behaviours is really critical, because that's what coercive control is. And one of the challenges that we have in our current system is that it is based on single incidents of violence, and often physical violence. So current legal mechanisms are really falling short of the ways in which victim survivors actually experience domestic and family violence. So as you mentioned, Queensland is in the process of criminalising coercive control, New South Wales as well. South Australia has committed to it, and I know that Western Australia is currently considering it. The other states and territories are on their own sort of reform journeys, and it will be interesting to see over the next year or so if there will be other commitments from states and territories to criminalise coercive control. And I should mention that Tasmania has had a similar offence in place since 2004.
Does there need to be a sort of national agreement on this, perhaps? And I noticed you didn't mention Victoria there, so I'd be intrigued as a Melburnian and a Victorian political reporter to know where they're at sort of there, given that there's so much legal reform at the moment. The Attorney Generals are talking a lot at the moment around the nation about the age of criminal responsibility, but should they also be talking about coercive control?
Yeah, look, I think in Victoria, in 2016, we had the Royal Commission into Family Violence, and very recently, a month or so ago, we've implemented all 227 recommendations that came out of that report. And I think right now the focus in Victoria is very much on continuing to invest and evaluate those reforms. So that's really the priority in Victoria at the moment. Whether or not they will consider criminalising coercive control, I'm not sure. But I think that if they were to do that, they would want to make sure that we have those whole of system reforms already in place so that it would be safe to do so. So at the moment, it's just about improving the Victorian system as it is now. In terms of the national consensus, the federal government, they've recently held consultations on national principles to address coercive control, and they consulted, all the states and territories. And that's all about ensuring that there's consistency in how we actually understand and define coercive control, because under current legislation in the states and territories, everyone has their own definition of what domestic and family violence is. So I think that that's a really important step being taken on the national level, and that will ultimately trickle down into policy and practice.
Ellen Reeves from the Family Violence Prevention Centre, really appreciate your time, and thanks for taking us through your research there. Thanks for joining us here on Sky News.
Thanks for having me.